This week on LCARA Ham Radio, we've got something special. We're going to show you the dark side of ham radio, and we're going to show you the light side of ham radio. What concerted effort by a club can accomplish in 2 years. That's what's coming up next on LCARA Ham Radio. Folks, it's difficult for me to express how much change has occurred up at the Monticello repeater, which we formerly called the abandoned repeater site. And if you just look at these pages, look how dark it is. How many trees are in and around this tower. You can't even see all the way down to the ground to where the guy lines are anchored. And this is going to be a reoccurring theme early on in this video as we pan across. Look at how much trash there is. There was even a dead carcass on this mountain, and pig bones, dead pig bones. A farmer used to raise pigs. This is the old shack, and this is just showing how rusted out it was. It was a Vietnam-era shack, and we had packet, we had 2 meters, we had other types of gear in here, but it leaked like a sieve, even though we painted it with a rubber coating on the roof, similar to what we did with the new shack. And you can just see the mold on the wall. It was, again, the dark side of ham radio. And there's a lot of you out there that either individually or in clubs, you have a similar situation where the old shack is old. Another look at the grounds as we came up from the road, and just look at how many trees, branches, weeds, how dark it is. This was after a rain as well. If you look closely at the dirt, you can see it's wet. It wouldn't drain very well. There was no air getting in. Look at the cars, car doors, all over the place. This is what we inherited with the abandoned repeater site. Look at all these trees, folks. Later on in the video, you're going to see the transformation. And so we got started. Now, we were cutting 2s and 3s each time we would go on a work day. So here's a couple. And then we got KK4 YUG trimming up and cutting into smaller pieces. And we decided as a club we'd have a fundraiser and we would buy a new insulated steel shack. These are made locally and they last forever. And they're wonderful for gear because they're essentially Thurdday cages. They protect against EMI as well as just being extremely durable. And they're good looking. So we had this delivered to what we call HQ, one of the farm where our club president lives, he and his wife, WM4LM. And we thought, well, let's do some of the electrical work and so forth here where it'll be a lot easier and more local. There's the air conditioner. You can see the floor's not even painted. This is just the shed as it came to us. They put the window opening, or excuse me, the AC opening there at the back, and we didn't have to do that. We asked for that. And they did it. And then we installed the AC. AC4DM had an AC that wasn't being used. And then we painted the floor with this gray anti-skid paint. And it really started to shape up. And then some of the members got to work with installing the electrical. Now, again, we're fortunate as a club because they are electrically minded. They are master electricians and have had certifications in the past. And so they got to work installing the panel, the conduit, the outlets. And then we had a rollback come and pick it up so we could take it to the mountain. And we plan to set this new shack next to the old one. Now, we lease the Monticello mountain, or the location where we are, not the entire mountain, of course. And we pay a yearly fee, and that's something that the club has to come up with every year. Here we are transporting it, and here we're dropping it off. This fellow was amazing with this truck. Not only does he know how to work a rollback, but he's also knew how to get his truck in there so that it would be the least amount of effort for him. You can see how close it's going to be to a new power pole that was installed. And it's going to also be moved in pretty darn close to the old shack. Look how beautifully white it is compared to that old drab green of the old shack. So we've got it off. the roll back there. It's next to the power pole, nice and convenient. That way we could run our electrical to the shack easily. And here's the side-by-side comparison. It's no comparison. Look how white and pristine the shack is. Brand new at this point. And this is a year and a half ago. We had to install brand new locks, security measures as well. We plan to put up cameras. We haven't done that yet, but that is coming up in a future project. A little bit of sunshine getting in, but you can see there's still a lot of shade. This is some of the, this is at the actual power pole, so we've just opened this up to see what we need to do to connect the new shack to the newly installed power pole. And then we installed conduit to come into the shack from the power pole. It had to go underground from the pole over to the shack about 6 feet and then back up. Here we're just installing some of the pipe or conduit for that. AC4DM and KK4YUG are both electricians. And then we're going to have that elbow there, and then we're going to come up from the ground. And again, look, they're making sure that it's level. And then we came up from the ground. So we had to dig a trench between the pole over to the shack. Had to be a certain depth to meet code. And now we can kind of see what it's going to look like. Now, what was interesting about this is we had to get the shack and this conduit inspected. And it was a fight. It's just difficult to get an inspector out without costing an arm and a leg, and it took us close to a year to get that. And that's why we'll see in the future here in the video that we did an alternate power source for not quite a year, but pretty close. And now that we've got the shack in place, we're starting to bring some of the equipment over that was in the old shack. We're going to put in the new one. Now, this is actually a rack that AC4DM had on the farm, so we've repurposed it, and we've installed a 2-meter Bridgecom repeater in this particular chassis, plus the duplexer, power, and that sort of thing. And the boys are just getting this installed in the shack. So you've got KY4CKP there on the back of the dolly, and then we've got the two gentlemen getting it into the shack. Look how empty that shack is at this point. Yeah, later on in the video, we're going to see we start filling it up, and it's like a lot of things. You think you get enough room, and you find ways to use that room. So we're well on our way. We've got the new shack, but no power. Even though it's right next to the power pole, we don't have it turned on yet because they haven't inspected the electrical work that we've done. You can see the Bridgecom's already sitting in there. We don't have the duplexers in at this point, and we don't have it hooked up to any kind of power at this point. AC4DM goes to work. This was the first hole we drilled, and this was to allow coax to come through the insulated steel panels. We have to drill on both sides to get it all the way through. But what's great about these insulated steel shacks is they're easy to cool, and they're easy to warm up in the winter as well, so you can keep your electric bill down. That way also you don't get condensation on the inside nearly as much. Just measuring some of that conduit, and then KK4 JPX is ensuring that an older existing antenna we can stick through there and hook up to the Bridgecom 2-meter repeater. And that's just so we can hopefully get on the air. But remember, we still don't have power at this point. We're just trying to get everything in place in preparation that we're going to have power. And we're checking the old SWR, and as we sweep, it was a little high, and we actually used an in-band, if you will, SWR tuner to bring that down a little bit. And then here we were just testing the Bridgecom against the antenna that was connected to that old coax. And this is using an old antenna up on the tower, and this is before we had cleaned everything off of the tower, which will be later on in this video. There's a bench that we're going to also start installing equipment on inside the shack. So again, we're going to start using that floor space pretty quickly. And I will show you a couple of times throughout the video. Look at the old coax just leaning up against the old shack. That old hard net, hard line there going up the tower that was used by a previous owner of this tower that we couldn't reuse. And you can see starting to fill up, but we still don't have that panel closed up because it hasn't been inspected yet. But you can see what the guys did out at the farm for conduit. And it just looks so much nicer. It's neater. It's bright white, so it doesn't take a lot of light inside the shack to see what you're doing. And there's the old tower once again. Now, we're going to pan up again so you can see the hard line. You can also see the old antennas. I believe that's me up on the tower this time around. And here's a view from partway up the tower. This is not all the way up, but towards the autumn season. Just beautiful. I love climbing towers just for the view, if for nothing else. And we're right next to another tower used by the Sheriff's Department. So we were testing out the Bridgecom. Things were working okay. It wasn't perfect. We needed to do a little bit more programming on the Bridgecom to work with the cat down below at the controller, which ultimately we're going to replace with an RCOM. And so we said, well, if we're not going to get power from the pole, even though we're right next to the pole, let's install some solar as a short-term solution, which ended up being more longer-term than we had anticipated. But install a solar panel. AC4DM had a panel that he had purchased several years ago, and we need to install that panel part way up. Now again, we still have old antennas, old hardline, but we're going to go ahead and install this panel with some electrical wiring there to feed into the shack so that we can keep the repeater powered with a couple of batteries, and we wanted to keep the batteries nice and charged up. So a couple of us are going to climb. KK4JPX and I are going to climb the tower, and we're going to install that solar panel. This was a lot of fun, actually, but it's great to have two people up on the tower and have to work together. And again, finding two people that can climb, number one, and then putting something pretty heavy up on the tower was an achievement. This panel's not overly much of a load. We kept it low to the ground, or low-ish, maybe a fourth of the way up. And then we're just checking the voltage coming in from the panel. It did not have direct sunlight at that point. We also created a patch panel, if you will, not a patch panel, but a panel with meters on it so we can see how much voltage is coming in and what was the amperage on the other side. That's just the back side. I don't know if I have a good video picture of the front, but you can see we've got the electrical coming in. You have to be really careful at this point because the panel's already been deployed, so there's voltage on that. And we haven't cleaned up our wiring yet. So here's the DC volts coming in, solar voltage. We have it labeled as well. We've got our controller, which is just an inexpensive controller, and then amperage. Now, the other thing we wanted to show is there was a lot of dirt around the shack, so we started pouring gravel around the shack. KK4JPX would load up his Tacoma with a load of gravel, and then we would pour this around, and we've got 3 or 4 loads, I think, at this point, to make it deep enough. Now, one of the problems we knew we were going to have were all the trees. The trees were in the guy lines. They were too close to the tower, too close to the shack, and we had an ice storm and wind, and it just clipped these trees off. I cut a lot of it out. There was more damage than I can show you, but it was amazingly bad. I mean, there were branches everywhere, just trees broken in half that we had to clear before we did the main clearing, which will come up here in just a few minutes. So this is one of those ongoing things. This is on, again, leased land, but we have permission to clear any of the trees that we deemed would be harmful to the shack if they were to fall or were to get in the way. And you can see just branch after branch, tree after tree down after this ice storm with the wind. Now, one of the things you may also notice, it's kind of difficult as we pan, but there's less garbage. We'd actually cleaned up quite a bit of the garbage, and the owner of this property had also taken, I believe, a bulldozer, possibly a subcompact tractor, and moved a lot of the old cars out of there. So you'll notice the old doors and cars and so forth, most of those are gone. So it's really starting to look better. Now, this is winter, so there's no leaves on the tree, so it looks like there's a lot of sunlight already. But when spring comes, with all these trees that were still up and around the shack, it was going to create problems for us. We even had a tree down at the beginning of the entrance going up to the shack. All of these had to be cut and hauled away. The property owner gave us the opportunity to just drag these to another part of the property and get them out of our way, and also essentially out of his way as well. Even got out the silky saw so we could get some of those branches a little bit higher up. But this was not the last that we were going to have of trimming trees and cutting down trees. We had so many trees that still had to come out of there because they had been allowed to grow for over 20 years, some of them. But this ice storm really wreaked havoc, and this slows us down. We had a lot of other projects that we wanted to get started on, and we couldn't. Now, we dropped off 81 bags of cement, Quickcrete ultimately, and we needed to replace the guy line anchors. Our tower, professional tower member, KI4RWO, looked at the guy lines and said he wasn't comfortable climbing the tower going forward. And those guy lines had gotten more loose as we'd had another storm and some more wind, and the anchors themselves were old and dilapidated and were moving. So the guy lines had gotten loose. So we decided to install brand new anchors. And then, as we'll see, we'll have to move those guy lines from the old posts to the new one. Here's the new ones, and that bright yellow on the top, and then you can see the steel plate on the bottom. We have to dig holes. This one was dug by hand by some of our members. Here we're just dropping the anchor post. So this is another project, but it was unforeseen. We had to do this before we could get radios and so forth back on the air. So yet another project just to get the site ready. First load of cement dumped into the hole, and it would take a dozen or so of those wheelbarrows full of cement. Deep enough and wide enough. We also had a member to bring out his backhoe. His subcompact tractor had a backhoe attachment, and this made digging two of the holes for the anchor post much easier because there's trees all around and the roots would make it difficult to dig a hole. This is, again, why a club is so beneficial, because you may have members that have talents and or tools in this case that could be useful on a day like this. Just beautiful to have the backhoe ready to go. And then we got busy doing cement. Josh there, I want to say it's KJ4OSS. I may have that slightly off, but this is what he did. He brought the tote with the water there in his truck, and he mixed cement for 2 straight hours. There you can see we've got our first anchor post and our LCARA 2022 down in the cement. Here's our second post. You can see the old rusted one behind it. And then this is our third post, also with the rusted anchor post. One of the anchor posts was nearly rusted through down at the base. So we began cutting down a bunch of trees on yet another work day. This is again before we can do any other work on the inside of the shack, because the guy lines we can't tighten or anything because of all these trees. So we must have felled close to 20 trees this day. We also had the tractor out, and we started pushing these big logs off to the side so that we could make room and they wouldn't be in the way. Again, you'll notice even with the trees that are felled, much less garbage in and around. Timber, another tree goes down. Josh was really helpful here cutting down trees as well on this day. We're also trying to cut down the trees so that we don't harm any of the VW Vanagons. Some of you have noticed and inquired about those. They're not ours, and we don't have any way to let the owner know about any interest. But we wanted to make sure when we cut these trees down, we didn't damage those. Yet another tree. Like I said, it was close to 20 trees that day. Plus, we'd already cut down probably, 6 or 10 before this day, just trying to get more sunlight and get these trees away from the guy lines and this new shack that we had invested in. And of course, all of these trees had to be cut up into sections, and then we have to haul them off by hand in most cases over the hill. These trees are not inconsequential. These are not trivial. These are decent-sized trees, and if you look at the the diameter on many of these trees, anywhere from probably 15, 20 years old to 30, somewhere in that ballpark. I'm sure they were all small when this tower went up originally and when the original shack was in place. There's Josh doing his best Tarzan. And then we got to work. Now that we got all the trees out, look how loose that guy line is up on the anchor, the old anchor. Ken got to work, KI4RWO, and he's a professional. He does this for a living. He does commercial towers as well as help us out on the ham side, both for the club and for individuals. Not necessarily for free, but nobody expects him to do this kind of work for free. And he's just going to town, and this is just to get them migrated from the old post to the new one. We didn't do the proper tensioning this particular day, so we came back like the next week to do the tensioning. So we're unbundling some of these so that, again, we can get them properly installed on the new anchor post there in yellow. As you can see, this is a lot of work so far through the video. And all we're trying to do is get this location back on the air. And we've got the 2 meter running at this point, but there were 2 other repeaters we wanted to get back on the air pretty quickly. GMRS was brand new. Actually, it wasn't to put back on the air. And we wanted to get a packet system back on the air that had been in the old shack. Plus, we got a lot of plans. More repeaters. So here's the guy lines going into the old post. You can see how dilapidated this post is, and we got a good shot down at the bottom. This was the anchor post that has the hole through it down at the bottom. You can kind of see it was rusted out, and you can see on the other side of that post. That was why it was so important to move everything. Now we have everything moved to the new anchor post, and this takes a month to get all of this work done, which slows us down. So another view of the tower with all the old cabling and all the old antennas on it that still have to come off. We do have our internet connectivity, so you can see the dish about halfway up. So Ken comes back out about a week later with his transits, and we need to start tensioning the guy lines so that the tower will be straight with the additional tension, and the tower won't be susceptible to high winds and a danger. So he's got a couple of tripods here. They're going to go out so that he can put his transits on, get an idea of the tower from bottom to top to make sure that it's straight as we start to add tension to these guy lines. And most of the guy lines are extremely loose at this point. So that's the old anchor post with everything moved off of it. Maybe 5 bags of concrete holding that in the ground. That's why they had those anchor behind it, just to keep it from moving forward, because they didn't have enough concrete on them. We had 27 bags of concrete per anchor post on the new ones. So they look great, they're just not tensioned. So he gets the transit out and he's going up and down to see how straight it is. Of course, you've got a tension on one side, then look, tension on another side, and look again. So this is going back and forth, because what you don't want to do is over tension on one side, and then the tower becomes bowed because you're too tight on one side and too tight on another side. It's not good for it. So he's got a special gauge, and of course it's got, through his experience, plus a little chart that's on the gauge itself, we're able to take a look at what is the current tension, which was very poor. I think some of them were down about 12 or 14, somewhere in that ballpark. It needed to be up in the 20s. So he's also giving us a class on how to utilize the tension gauge, and then ultimately how to go about doing proper tensioning. None of us are going to be as good as he is, because he does this nearly every week. But now we're looking through the transit again once we've made some adjustments. Start at the bottom and he'll work his way up. So again, having somebody in the club that can do this work. Now, if you don't have this person in your club, certainly you can hire this out, and they're usually pretty reasonable. Then we went to town. That's Ken's father there in the background. He's been doing tower work and introduced Ken, I guess, to this work. So they've both got probably 50 years of experience, probably more, just doing tower work. So now that we've done some tensioning on either side, 3 sides obviously, we have to, again, use the transit, make sure we're not creating a bow in the tower where it's bowing in one direction. It's straight up and down. And we would go to one side, then to another side, check the transit, go to one side, go to a different side, check the transit all the time, making sure that we're keeping that tower as straight as possible. And we're finishing up some work here on the tensioning, and then eventually we're going to tie those off to make sure that the buckles themselves aren't twisted and allowing that tension to escape. KY4 CKP helping out there, KK4 JPX, KI4 RWO. Not sure if Ken's father has a ham call or not. The bottom wires are the easy ones to get to, the guy lines on the bottom, but the top ones need a little bit of a stool. We had some tires still on the property that we can use. And here's Chris and Ken running the additional cable through the buckles to make sure that they're not going to twist. And we use one of them to go through several of the buckles, and then that's tied off as well. Here's KK4 YUG that is tightening up a couple of clamps to make sure that that cable doesn't unravel or in any way come loose. And again, all of this work was necessitated because it's an old tower. It was an old site. So this is, with the trees gone, you can see so much more light coming in here. This is a beautiful day. We still had some old antennas, old cabling on the tower. So our next work day at this point is to get back on the tower and start cleaning things off of the tower. And, you know, because we have new antennas and new coax going to go up on this tower for a variety of repeaters coming in this video and in the future. So this is the new antenna. We use a Comet GP3. This is a dual band antenna. We're using this antenna for the 2-meter bridge comm that we installed earlier. And we're also going to use this antenna with a duplexer from Comet for the GMRS repeater. But we're going to put this on the very top. This is going to replace an old antenna that had been up there for over 20 years. And when we climb the tower on this day, not only are we installing a brand new antenna for the two repeaters, but we're also taking off old antennas and old cabling on our way down. So this is the first brand new antenna on the tower after all the work. And this is me up on the tower yet again, a little bit higher this time. Everything's so beautiful in this part of Kentucky. There's Monticello there in the background. And again, there's a lot of other towers in this same area because it's a perfect mountain for communications of all types. Beautiful, isn't it? So on this day, we are taking old antennas off, old cabling off, installing a new antenna at the very tippy top of this tower. This tower is about 130 feet. We both got our gear on. There goes Ken up the tower. Of course, he goes up this like a monkey because he does it all the time. Doesn't seem to get tired at all. I believe we were on the tower this day for over 4 hours. There's an old antenna just to the left of me. That's coming off. And again, some of the old cabling that was still there. Some of the old hardline. See that solar panel bright in the sun there. And again, working in tandem allows you to hand things to each other. Make sure that you're lowering things in a controlled way. Here we've got some of that old hardline coming down the tower here that we couldn't use. And again, we need to do this safely. There was 2 or 3 of these that we had to lower down. Look at all the sunshine in and around the shack now. Now we're at the very top, and Ken goes all the way to the top because he's got a lot of experience with this, and you can see he's installing that Comet GP3 that the 2-meter repeater and the GMRS repeater are both going to use. But if you look below him about 15 feet, there's 3 antennas. Those are coming down. And then I came down part way, partly because I'm not nearly as good stamina-wise on the tower. And now that we've got the tower cleaned up, got the antenna installed, it's time to install two pieces of equipment. The packet that you see here, the packet radio, is used by several of our members on Sunday evenings. And this was in the old shack, and we want to make sure we get it installed in the new shack. Plus, we need new cable to come in, so we needed to drill a brand new hole. And then KK4JPX got to work painting the top side of the new shack with this rubber paint coating used for RVs. There's the packet radio. It had been off the air over a year, so we wanted to get it connected and test it out and make sure that it was working okay. We also had an old piece of tower that wasn't a part of the tower we're on that we are going to utilize for a temporary antenna because we couldn't climb the tower to install a new antenna on this day. This is a different day, so we're going to use this old section to get the packet radio's antenna up in the air. And it's working great, but eventually this is going to make it over to the tower. And then we had created, and we have a whole series on building a GMRS repeater, and this is the repeater that had been built over a year ago, waiting for the new shack to be ready, and because of all the other projects, it took a while. And we booted this thing up, and it worked perfectly. And in fact, we've been letting a number of people making requests that yes, you can start using the GMRS repeater. If you haven't gone to My GMRS, you can do so if you're in the area. Just be courteous, and yes, you can use this repeater. So we'll wrap things up a little bit here. There's so much work that went into this site, and we wanted to summarize it. There's a whole video series on the abandoned repeater site, but it's good to see everything come together and how much time sometimes this will take. Here's the ugly. We've got a few ugly shots. You can see all the trees in and around the old shack, plus the old hard line just bundled up there and going up the tower that had to come off. Look at all these trees in and around. You can't even see those Vanagons over there in the background. There's with it cleared, and so this is the beautiful, and we can see towers. You can see a lot more dirt in and around, and the dirt itself is drying out much better. Another ugly shot. You can see the cars, the old truck there, the car door, how much shade there is. The ugly once again with the old shack, the rusting out of the shack, the mold, the mildew, the water intrusion that we needed to get out of as quickly as possible. And then the new shack coming up. This is just so much fun to have a brand new shack with the room that it has. And again, it'll last for decades. Here we've got the newly painted roof of the shack here recently. Again, hardly any shade in and around. The new anchor post that we put in to replace the old anchor post, plus moving the guy lines and tensioning those guy lines. There's the tower with all of the equipment still on it, all the hard line and all of the old antennas. And then all of that came down, and we have a brand new antenna at the very top. And there's our 2-meter repeater that's on the air, and the GMRS here in just a minute. For the Lake Cumberland Amateur Radio Association, we hope you've liked this series on the abandoned repeater site. Give us a thumbs up, and thanks for watching. 73.